A genius scientist accidentally found himself locked out of his own life and was reborn in the Joseon era, traveling back hundreds of years through space and time. Fortunately, in his new life he was born as the crown prince of the Joseon dynasty, one of the most famous kingdoms in Korean history. In this new world, he disrupted the established order by using knowledge from the future to reform his country. This is the premise of Black Corporation Joseon. Finally, all the opponents of the crown prince had been exiled. Now the crown prince's wishes were proceeding smoothly. Spring had arrived. May goodness and prosperity always be bestowed upon the nation of Joseon. We return to the main hall. The king is seated on his throne. He looks around and says, "It seems everyone is present. I have a major announcement to make today." The ministers exchange glances. They are curious about the announcement His Majesty is about to deliver. Some of them suspect it is one of the crown prince's ideas. They wonder, can the jump rope method really change someone that much? Amid the ministers' unease, the king suddenly speaks loudly, "I plan to carry out a massive reform." The ministers are shocked. Yang, the crown prince, shows a worried expression. In his heart he thinks, finally it begins. A few weeks ago Yang was sound asleep in his room. Suddenly a voice was heard, "Yang, are you asleep?" In his heart he wondered, is that father's voice? He woke up and sat on the bed, then replied, "Not yet, please come in." However, his father answered from outside, "No need. I just need the chart you used during the presentation." Yang replied, "The chart is on the desk. You can take it." The king then instructed his eunuch to retrieve the chart. After obtaining it, the king said, "I'll be going. You should sleep now." Yang yawned and thought to himself, "What's going on at this late hour? I'm already so sleepy." That night, Yang had no idea that the king's visit would bring him major trouble. The next day the king visited Yang again. "Yang, there's a part of your chart I don't understand. Can you explain it?" Yang nodded and said, "Of course, please come in." But this incident didn't happen just once. The next day the king came again. "Yang, after thinking about it, there's something in the chart you made?" The day after that the king came again. And so it continued. Every day the king would discuss the chart. Yang began to feel disturbed. His sleep was no longer peaceful. One night, the king returned to his room. Yang thought to himself, this man? Isn't he tired? It's already 1 in the morning. But his eyes only grow brighter the more we talk. Suddenly the king said, "It seems you don't understand. Here, let me explain it again." Yang was startled and quickly replied, "No, I understand perfectly." The king smiled and said, "Good. I'm very pleased to have such a wise son." Yang sighed and replied, "I'm glad if you're glad." Back to the main hall. The king stood before the ministers. He held up a book titled Joseon Reformation Plan. "I want you all to examine it carefully," said the king. "Identify the problems we can solve and find ways to improve this system. If you have a better plan, report it directly to me. This is the Sejong Reformation." The ministers whispered among themselves. The king continued his explanation. "The first reform is the reorganization of the central government. Geoffrey has created a new administrative model. Starting with the 6 ministries, we have designed a more effective implementation procedure. The second reform is the restructuring of local administration. The Gyeonggi province will be divided into 5 regions. Gyeonggi province will become 7 and Gangwon will become 5. Each region will organize its own local administration. And lastly, but no less important, the scene shifts. The king and Yang walk side by side in the palace corridor. The king begins, "Crown Prince, let's discuss commercialization and industry today." Yang is surprised. "Now," he asks. The king nods. "I just thought of something during our morning exercise earlier." Yang is curious. "What is it, father?" The king explains clearly, "During your presentation you didn't mention this. But in your chart, it's written that through commercialization and industry, not only will Joseon's economic power increase, but so will the king's authority." Yang thinks for a moment, then asks, "I understand that the economy can grow. But how does this strengthen the king's power?" The king looks at Yang, waiting for an answer. Yang then says, "The logic is simple. Agriculture is the main source of wealth for officials and nobles. If the royal court supports the development of commercialization and industry, we can create more wealth. This will increase the influence of the royal court and ultimately strengthen the king's power. The king nods but then asks again, but in the end, won't the officials and nobles also buy goods from merchants? They are the main consumers. If this happens, won't they also grow richer and more powerful? Yang smiles. Father, look at the bigger picture. The king listens attentively. Yang continues, if we generate wealth through the royal family's production and trade, we can free ourselves from the limitations of land. Officials and nobles may be wealthy, but they are still confined to their lands. Meanwhile, the royal court can grow faster by leveraging broader trade. The king smiles with satisfaction. Now I understand. Thank you, my son. You are truly as wise as I had hoped. However, the king suddenly asks again, but what about capital? To start a business we need capital. The problem is, most of the wealth is currently in the hands of the nobles. If merchants borrow money from them, wouldn't that make the nobles even richer and more powerful, not the king? Yang smiles slightly. That's just one method, father. We can attract merchants to us. The source of credit doesn't have to come from officials and nobles, but from the royal court itself. At that moment, Yang suddenly remembers the modern world before he was reborn into the past. In the 21st century, he thinks, national banks are institutions created by the government to achieve specific goals. Their largest investors are the state, not individuals. With enthusiasm, Yang begins to explain to the king about the modern banking system in his mind. He speaks at length about how the state can take on the role of the primary lender, not the nobles. The king listens intently. The next day, the king confidently proposes the idea of a national bank as the final reform in his reformation plan. As a result of this massive reform, the need for more officials increases. The royal court begins searching for talented individuals to fill various important positions. The king then issues a new order: we must review our education policy. Everyone, even commoners, must have the right to a minimum education so they can become part of the new government system. This reform is carried out very carefully. The king sends investigators to various regions to observe its impact. However, as expected, problems begin to arise from all directions. In the early stages of implementation, the reform takes a long time to be fully applied. It is estimated that it will take 15 years for this policy to be enforced throughout Joseon. In the distant future, historians will refer to this period as the Year of the Dragon's Reformation. In a long corridor, the king and Hyang walk side by side. The king looks at his son with pride and says, "Thank you, Hyang. This will take a long time, but because of you, the lives of our people will become more prosperous than ever before." Hyang smiles. They finally arrive at their destination. Hyang looks around and says, "Father, wouldn't it be better if I worked with the scholars? I think you don't need to handle everything yourself." The king shakes his head. This is for the good of Joseon. How can its king not understand what is best for his people? He pats Hyang's shoulder and looks at him seriously. "What do you think is better?" asks the king. Understanding something through direct experience or just hearing about it and drawing conclusions? Hyang falls silent. The king continues, "I don't want to be a king who only signs documents without understanding their contents. I must see the conditions on the ground myself. I don't want to just hear reports from my throne." He smiles. "Come, let's go in now." Yang looks at his father with pride. In his heart he says, "As I expected. No matter how much I know about the future, there's one thing I can't surpass. The person standing before me is the true king of Joseon." And that's the story of this chapter. What room did they enter? What will happen next? Stay tuned for the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the latest updates from this incredible manhwa. See you in the next video.